Good afternoon. Hey, it's me again. This is week number 3. I want to welcome you guys to Be the People. This is week number 3. I'm your host, Lawrence Sanders Jr., and I appreciate you being here with me tonight. For those who are in the car that are driving, keep your hands on the wheel, pay attention to what's going on, pray that you get home safely. And for those who are joining me, thank y'all for joining. It's so good to be with y'all tonight. We got some good stuff coming up tonight. I'm super excited as always to be here and to share with you guys what I feel and what I believe we as a people, we as a culture are called to, and what we got to get done in this season of our lives, y'all. So check this out. I just want to recap real quick. Um, um, just real quick. I want to talk about what we talked about last week. So we talked about first political enlightenment. We talked about how we have to be enlightened in the sense of we need knowledge and information. What we do with that information empowers us, gives us ammunition, if you will. And then we talked about political engagement. Now we have the information and we have the knowledge. Now we know what's going on, how the system is working, what's happening, what's going on around us, who's doing what. Now it's a call to action. Now there's something that we have to do at this point in the game. And that's political engagement. After we learn, we continue to learn. After we continue to act, there's political evolution. And in political evolution, again, this is the advancement. This is the, as you will, manifestation. If you're a B Simone fan, that was a little shade. But yeah, this is the manifestation of the work that we've done. And what I mean by the work is arming ourselves with information, arming ourselves with the know-how, and then going, putting boots on the ground, taking action. So political enlightenment, political engagement, political evolution. All right, that is the basis. That is the premise of what we got going on and what we're doing here at Be the People. And remember, Be the People, it is a call to action. It's not just a suggestion. It's not just something that sounds cool. That'd be a dope podcast or internet, show. No, it's actually something that we are called to do. So, Be the People, we live. Thank you for joining me. I'm super happy that you're here with me. Um, and so um let's talk about what we talked about last time just for a little bit. We talked about the government. And basically we gave the origins and kind of like the history of a few common government forms of governments that we've known here in the United States. So the different forms that we talked about last week were aristocracy, and we'll touch on this. We'll touch and move because there's some other stuff that I really want to talk about concerning the Constitution. So the first thing we talked about was the aristocracy form of government, which basically this is the government ruled by what is considered the best. These were your wealthy landowners. These were people who had influence. And one of the examples was the Roman Catholic Church. They controlled everything. They were the government. They controlled everything that went in, that went out. They even had somewhat of a caste system. The next form of government that we talked about was monarchies. And as we know now, there are more constitutional monarchies, which means there is I guess, a binding document that binds these kings and queens to the document. So this is ruled by a king or a queen. So we know, Queen Elizabeth the first through the 95th. It's a whole bunch of them. So yeah, and then we have the oligarchy, and this is where we talked about last week how this is ruled by a few, um, and is heavily influenced by those who have money. And we talked about last week how this can actually mirror the United States of America, how billionaires, and we talked about, and we mentioned the word lobbyists, have the ability to influence lawmaking. They have the ability to influence the political culture, if you will, simply by making donations to get an outcome that works in their favor. So basically, an oligarchy, although by design the United States is not that, it could be seen as that. So remember, the oligarchy is ruled by a few, and the United States kind of mirror that, simply because like a lot of our politicians are paid for. So if you're a billionaire and you have money and you are working in pharmaceuticals, you can pay a lot of money and you can get legislation passed, where you are. That's just how it works. That is a strong possibility. All right. And then we get to our form of government considered to be a democracy or democratic republic, which basically in a nutshell, which means it's ruled by the people. So for the people, by the people. For all my old like 90s babies and people who grew up in the era of FUBU, for us, by us. That's basically what it was. It was for the people, by the people. And what we're gonna get into tonight kind of helps explain that ideology through this document called the Constitution. But before we get to the Constitution, just wanted to talk about again the Democratic Republic. It was a system of government where the citizens exercise power by voting, which basically means we have a say in the government that's basically been made public. And this is what I want to drive home. And this is one of the reasons why we have this show. I want us to realize the ability and the power that we have as Americans who, by the Constitution, who live here, like we have a voice. And one of the tools that we have, and we are in an election season. Excuse me, tongue tied tonight. We are in this election season, and so like we have to know like the powers that we have. I've starting to talk to and ran into a few people who are like, "Yo, bro, like I don't vote." I'm like, "What? You don't vote? Like, what you mean you don't vote?" Like, "Yeah, bro, it's pointless." Nah, man, it's not pointless. It's not pointless. It has a purpose. It has its place, and our government was set up to do so. And we are as we go over these next few weeks, we are going to talk about how the founding fathers set it up in that way. That's why we're called a democracy. The democracy again is for the people, by the people. Now, it doesn't always seem that way, which means there's some work for us to do. Again, that is a part of being the people. That goes back to the awareness piece. We have to make sure that we know what is happening, what is happening and what's not happening. Because when we know what's not happening, now we can start holding people accountable. But how do we do that? Again, that goes to awareness. How do we hold our elected officials accountable? Like those are things that we have to know, but that goes back to our awareness. But we have that ability living in a republic democracy or a democratic republic, however you want to say it. So again, I want to encourage, and you guys will hear me say this constantly and often, you have authority in your vote. I want you to know that. And I've gotten some reasons. It's like, yeah, anytime I vote, we don't win. Well, I mean, it doesn't mean that the vote doesn't work. Just don't be a sore loser. I mean, I mean, I get it. It's like every time I vote, it doesn't go my way. Well, I understand that. Keep voting though. Keep voting. Please, 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 please keep voting. But that was neither here nor there. I didn't want to go on a rant about voting. I just want us to know that there is a charge and a call that we have to exercise our abilities, and we're going to talk about how we got there. So the next thing we talked about last week, we still in the recap. Hey Shante, thank you for joining me tonight. Kendrick, good to see you again, man. Thank you for joining me tonight. Good to see y'all. Y'all, this is crazy. This is crazy, y'all. Like, just as I was going through and looking at a lot of this stuff, and I'm still in the recap. We were talking about the Articles of Confederation and how this was the United States attempt to basically organize, and how bad it failed. Like, the government sucked initially. Like, they had this document called the Articles of Confederation that basically was the governing document that led the nation. But here's why it didn't work. There was no central leadership. So you had 13 colonies, or at that point they were considered to be states that had no executive branch. Like, there was no leadership. So how was that going to happen? You had 13 individual states trying to function as one, but there was no central leadership. Like, and they signed off on this. They did. They debated, they talked about it, and they signed off on it, and it was just like, this doesn't make sense. Eventually they would find out. It's crazy. And then there was no national court system, so there was no judicial branch. So how do we carry out and enforce the laws that we have here as a nation, as a country? Like, how do we do that? Well, you can't, because there's no judicial branch. Like, what do our laws look like? We don't know. There was no judicial branch. It was just, there was no national law. It was just, for this state, this is what we feel like is cool. This is what we're going to do. And then the other thing was this: you have to know, we just came out of the revolutionary period where we were independent. And so just think, if somebody came over here and was like, yo, we need this back, how are we gonna defend that? Like, there was no army. There was no way to raise an army. It was like, yo, like, we need to fight. Y'all down? And Massachusetts be like, nah, bro, we'll catch y'all next time. So the Articles of Confederation, although it had great intent, it wasn't effective, if you will. Like, there was no effectiveness when it came to this document. And so they needed to have something more reformed. Again, it goes back to the awareness. Like, yo, we have these documents. This is what we need. It's not working. So we need to change it. There's the action. And then after the action point, hey, there was advancement, because after the Articles of Confederation was birthed the Constitution. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about the Constitution, but not the Constitution in its entirety. We're going to talk about the first part of the Constitution. And I broke the Constitution up into three parts. And the first part that we are going to talk about tonight is the preamble. We're going to talk about the preamble, and that's a fancy way of saying, like, the opening statement, if you will. I found out about the preamble years ago, for all my Schoolhouse Rock fans, what the preamble was. And if you don't know who or about Schoolhouse Rock, it's on YouTube. I actually had the whole, tell y'all a quick story. So when I was living by myself, I was around like 2021. I didn't have cable, I didn't have internet, but I had a laptop, and I had the entire collection of Schoolhouse Rock, an encyclopedia and a dictionary. So when my girlfriend came over at the time, guess what I was doing? I was watching the Schoolhouse Rock series. And I talking about, like, all of them. So the math, the social studies, history, government, all of that. And I loved it. Like, I loved it. I mean, I'm not ashamed of it. I get clowned about it a little bit now, but whatever. But that's how I learned specifically about the preamble. But I was watching Schoolhouse Rock, like, growing up in elementary school on Saturday mornings. So that's when I first heard about the preamble. It's like, you hear about it, passing, whatever, whatever. But once I started getting into the actual language, and that's the more recent thing that I want to talk about tonight, is the language. What is the preamble saying? What were the founding fathers trying to get across in this document called the Constitution? And so I want to read what the preamble says. It says, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish the Constitution for the United States of America." Wow. Wow. Like, in reading it growing up, it didn't really have meaning until later in life. It's one of those things where, as you continue and you live through life, and you live and you have experiences, you go back and you read certain things, and it's just kind of like, they really wrote this. But for me, from my seat as being an African American, a man of African American descent, or of African descent, who happens to live in America, these words, yeah, Kendrick, Schoolhouse Rock was it, man. I mean, learn how to count by fives and all of that. Um, but these words, like, they hit different. Like, when you turn on the news and you see all the craziness going on, and then you go back and you read the Constitution, the preamble is like, yo, like this, "We, the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice." And so you start asking questions like, what does justice look like? Because like, what were they talking about when they were considering justice? Because I'm pretty sure that's not the same justice that I'm seeing now, what they were talking about back then in 1787. And to ensure domestic tranquility, to provide for the common defense, to promote general welfare. Like, what does that even mean? Because when I look and I see the country and the nation as a whole, like, I don't see general welfare. I don't see domestic tranquility. Like, we really are divided. We are so divided right now. And I'm not really into who you decided to vote for and who you love, your Democratic or Republican Party, but just as a whole, when you take a step back, and you don't even have to look at Fox News, you can just, however you find out what is going on in the world, you can tell as a nation, as the United States, we are so divided. There is no domestic tranquility here. And so in reading the preamble, it's like their purpose and their intention as a nation, as a group of individuals, as a government, is to have, and it says to ensure. That means to guarantee. That means we are going to have domestic tranquility, and we are going to do whatever that takes to have domestic tranquility. And so I'm reading these words, and I'm like, good night. Like, what happened? Like, where did we go wrong? Like, how did we get here? Right. And so I started breaking it down, started going down and just started talking about it. And again, like, it won't be too many rants, but like a lot of this stuff just hit different living in the world in 2020 as we are right now. Like, it's crazy. It's crazy to read this dialogue, but then to turn on the news and see that cops who murdered a young lady still have not been brought to justice. I was watching an interview from the cast of When They See Us, and what's his name, Josh Hartman, I believe that was, he played the one of the defense attorneys, the white guy. He was one of the defense attorneys. And what he said as he was going through the script, and as they went through the movie, and as he watched the movie, they asked what he felt about the justice system, and he said it should be called something else, because justice is not what exists in the system. But in the original documentation, in the preamble, it says to establish justice, to ensure domestic tranquility, to provide for the common defense, to promote general welfare. Right? So we'll start from the top, and it says, we the people. It says, we the people of the United States. But now we have to go back, though. We have to figure out who are people. Right? So who when they were writing this, who were they considering to be people? And so then people was defined as free white men. That meant no women or people of color. They were giving a voice in forming the new government. So think about that. So again, when it was initially written, these people that were free white men, no women or people of color, they were given a voice. This is what the Constitution did for them. And we're talking about then, and then we'll tie it into now, because we look at it now, and with the amendments that were given, that actually gives us access to this as well. So we, the people, because of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, which we'll talk about later, we now have a voice in forming the government. We have that authority. Although initially that wasn't the intent, because you have to know, kind of like during the same time, like there was something called the Three-Fifths Compromise. Oh, you thought we weren't going to talk about it? No, like the Three-Fifths Compromise basically meant, and in a nutshell, for every 5 slaves, so the solution was to count 3 out of every 5 slaves as people, right? So we weren't even considered a whole person, because again, it was about ownership. It was like we were owned, we were property. And so even then, like we were not the people. We were the property. If you were a slave, whether you were African, were you from Cuba, Africa, it didn't matter. You were not a person. You were not free and you were not white. And if you were a woman and you were white and you were free, you were still not considered a person. How damning is that as a nation, as a government? How skewed was their vision? How skewed were their definitions of people? And like I said, it hit different now because it still kind of feels that way, right? Like we still feel like, although like now people are defined as free black men and women, like we still feel like we don't have a voice. It still feels that way. And tonight is like, it's just real talk. Last night it was the information and education and all that, but tonight, like if we can be real, like it still doesn't feel that way. It still doesn't appear that way. Like we have on paper again these rights, these freedoms, these liberties, but it doesn't feel that way because again we had the 3/5 compromise, and here's the more scoop on the 3/5 compromise. The compromise solution was to count 3 out of every 5 slaves as people for election purpose. Its effect was to give the southern states a third more seats in Congress and a third more electoral votes than if slaves had been ignored, but fewer than if slaves and free people had been counted equally. So translated, if we were counted as equals, the situation would be different. And it will make sense now as to why it still feels that way. Like there was a point in this document that didn't include us as African Americans as people. We were property. And this is even more reason to go to my point of voting, why now we have to use the power and authority that we have, because we have it. Because there was a point in our ancestry, in our culture, in our history, where we were not even considered people. And how dare you throw away the very privilege and right that you have to see the change that we need to see? Like there was a point where we were not people. And yet we get back, it says that we the people of the United States. They wasn't talking about us, but now they are. We are the people. And again, that goes back to what we're talking about tonight of being the people. The whole point of this is that we have a call to action. And it's understanding where we came from before and where we are now. Right? So this is why it's important, why we act on the ability and the powers that this document has given us. The Constitution in its entirety is owned by the people. I want to make sure we understand this. The Constitution is not owned by the government. It's the government that is owned by the people. Like they get their power and authority from us. So it is by us through the Constitution that they receive power. And it's the Constitution that gives us the power that allows them to do what it is that they do. Right? So just I watched that movie with a group of young people, When They See Us, and it man, it broke my heart to read this dialogue in this language, and it talks about justice and tranquility. They locked these 5 boys up for something that they did do, and they went to the extent to make sure that they corroborated the stories and all this other stuff, and it just wasn't right. And if we're going to establish justice here in our nation, in our country, we have to use our voice and we have to use our power. All right, I don't want to stay there too long. So if we keep reading, it says to provide for the common defense. And my understanding of that is this: it means that the protection of the United States, its citizens, and property is the responsibility of the federal government and not individual states. Common defense is the protection of a country as a whole against both foreign and domestic. And I want to pause right here real quick and talk about why are we struggling still taking down Confederate statues, right? If if it's the United States' responsibility to provide for the common defense, we know that the Confederates were tyrants. Like, they were tyrants. There were people who were willing to kill other people for the sake of having slaves. And it's crazy that, like, we argue about keeping these statues up. Well, that wasn't the common defense. It's not. They were terrorists. And based on that understanding to provide for the common defense, it's the government's responsibility to protect us from that. But then also their response, like, we don't need to keep this junk around. It's dumb. Tear it down. Get rid of it. I'll keep moving. To promote the general welfare and secure blessings of liberty. Now, again, we talk about the word liberty. Liberty is the state of being free within society from oppressive restrictions imposed by authority on one's way of life, behavior, or political views. This is in the preamble. This is the purpose of the Constitution. It says to secure the blessings of the state of being free within society from oppressive restrictions imposed by authority in one's way of life. It's not happening, but we have the ability to change that. We have the power. This document, they wrote it out. Before we didn't, now we do. It's here in black and white. No pun. Like, it's here on paper. This was the intention, to promote general welfare and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and all future generations. So it's not just for them in that moment. They were smart enough to have foresight. They were able to see past where they were in this moment. And we have to consider this now. Like, we have to see past where we are, how we feel, what we feel like is not working. And to get to the evolution we need to see, we have to, again, educate ourselves, and then we have to act, because it's not just about us. It is about our future. It is about our kids and their kids and their kids' kids. Here in just a little bit, we're going to talk about John Lewis and how he paved the way for people like me to be able to have this conversation over the internet. But again, be the people in understanding the preamble and the language that it has. It empowers us. It gives us the ability. It gives us the, like I said last week, it's like we're we are superheroes who have superpowers and we don't know how to use them. But here in the preamble, it gives us that ability to do that, not just for us and for our future generations. All right, that's enough about that. I feel like I was on the soapbox for a little bit, but this is just about us being the people. Real quick, on our daily take, I want to take some time to pay homage to one of our fallen heroes, one of our fallen soldiers, um, John Robert Lewis, y'all. He is one of the reasons why um I even was interested. I remember seeing there was this video of him having a conversation with I believe it was like a white officer, and he was just, well, you should go back to where you, well, sir, would you like to, he offered to pray for, like, I was like, yo, who is this guy? And I had a teacher explain to me, like, that was John Lewis, and that's who these people are. But real quick, like, before we leave during our daily take, I just wanted to take some time out to just kind of pay homage to our hero, John Lewis. He was born February 21st, 1940. Um, his father was a sharecropper. He was a civil rights leader who served in the United States House of Representatives for Georgia's 5th Congressional District from 1987 to 2020. Dude had tenure. He fulfilled many key roles in the civil rights movements, in his actions to end legalized racial segregation in the United States. He was one of the members of the Big Six. If anybody know who the Big Six are, they were a group of leaders who organized the March on Washington in 1963, which actually the celebration of that is coming up in August. Got something special for y'all on that, by the way. Um, in 1961, Lewis became one of the 13 original Freedom Riders. Like, that's huge. Um, and he's always been the voice, and he's always been rebellious, but he called it good trouble. He led the Selma to Montgomery marches against the Edmund Pettus Bridge, he got his skull cracked. Literally, he was one of the first people that was engaged by law enforcement. They had his skull cracked. But as he called, like as he said, he would always say, we get into good trouble. We get into some good trouble. He boycotted George W. Bush by staying in his Atlanta district. He did not attend his swearing in. In 2003, Lewis spoke to a crowd of 30,000 in Oregon during the anti-war protest before the Iraq War. Check this out. Even after he was elected, he was arrested in 2006 and 2009 outside of the Sudan embassy in protest against genocide in Darfur. He was one of the 8 U.S. representatives from 6 states arrested while holding a sit-in near the west side of the U.S. Capitol building to advocate for immigration response. Like his rap sheet is so long. When you get a chance, go check him out. On July 17th, though, he died. He was 80 years old after a 6 months battle with pancreatic cancer in Atlanta. So today's Daily Take, salute to Mr. John Robert Lewis. I want to tell y'all, thank y'all for joining me. We will see y'all next Tuesday, where we will continue to break down the Constitution of the United States. Thank y'all for hanging out. We'll see you next week. Peace.